So welcome everybody to the inaugural WoodsWise Lunch Hour. I'm Andy Schultz. I'm the Landowner Outreach Forester for the Maine Forest Service. Hope everybody had a relatively easy time signing on. Probably the folks who are on did have a relatively easy time, and the ones who had a hard time aren't here yet. So anyway, a couple of ground rules. I think everybody has their audio muted now and also their cameras off, and we'd like to more or less keep it that way until you either ask a question or make a comment, just to keep the background chatter down, and that tends to keep things from echoing, and also make sure that there's plenty of bandwidth here. We do want things to be as interactive as possible, so we'll try to find that balance point between everybody being able to join in a conversation, but not creating too much confusion. There is a raise your hand function. You should see a kind of floating bar with some icons on it, and you'll see the one that says, looks like a hand. So if you do want to interject or ask a question at some point, you can use that, and then we'll sort of call on you, and then you can unmute, turn your camera on, and talk to everybody. There's also, if you're not familiar, there's a chat box. Looks like a little sort of paragraph with a little point at the lower right corner. When you click on that, it says show conversation. So you can always type a question in there or comment. We'll also maybe put a few things in there during the course of the hour. And then there's an icon that says to show the participants, so you can see who else is on, just a listing of names. So hopefully there are no issues with that. If does anybody right now just have a question about how to which buttons to push? Looks like no questions. Okay, great. So I think just before we get started with your questions, I'd like to introduce Julie Davenport. She's our district forester based in Nargeoak, covering Franklin and Somerset counties mostly. And Julie can finish introducing herself and just talk about what district foresters do.
Great. Thanks, Andy. So some of you have met me before, some of you probably haven't. And probably a lot of you knew Patty Cormier, and I took her place in Western Maine. So kind of what we do, for those who may not know, as district foresters, there's 10 of us in the state. We each kind of have an area that we cover. Mine is largely Franklin County and southern Somerset. And I'm basically available as a resource to whoever may or may not need me for anything to do with trees and forestry. So I can help with education and assistance on people's land, for whether you're a landowner or a forester or a logger, municipalities, doing school groups, anything like that. Available to answer questions about anything. We do meetings with landowners to go out and walk on the property and have real-time one-on-one conversations about management goals or various questions about regulations or timber harvest planning, anything like that. We put on some workshops and trainings for folks, loggers, foresters, landowners, and we can also help with loggers and foresters kind of trying to interpret some of the restrictions on harvesting. We like to try to be there as a helpful group instead of a after the fact shut you down kind of organization. Certainly dealing with things on the front end is a lot easier for everybody involved. But we're kind of just available as information for anybody who's looking for it. And if myself or someone else doesn't know the answer, we're happy to try to get you in contact with the right person who can. But that's kind of the quick and dirty on what we do. I'm still kind of getting it figured out. I just started in October, but this is kind of a new step. This is what we're doing today, of trying to adapt to the limited public interactions that are with everything going on. So happy to answer any questions that anybody's got as best I can, or see what we can do.
All right, well, thank you, Julie. I think it's worth mentioning that it's still, district foresters are still making appointments with people to walk in their woods, small groups or one-on-one. There are some rules that apply there. Best thing to do is, if you're ready to do that, make the call, talk to the district forester, talk about, you know, the ability or willingness to maintain necessary distancing and use face coverings when it's advisable. So it's not exactly business as usual, but business still continues. What we're not really able to do very well is have groups, larger groups indoors for workshops, which is something we've done a lot of. We're working through some of the replacements for that, and this is one potential replacement. So again, this is the first one we've tried. We'll see how it goes, and we're going to be interested in everybody's feedback afterwards too. So just a little spoiler alert, there will be a little survey. There will be a test, not really, but there will be a link to a short survey that we're going to put in the chat box a little bit later, and we really hope you'll fill that out, because it'll be very helpful to us going forward. So as far as questions sent in ahead of time, not too many of you had a question ahead of time. In fact, as far as I can tell, there were only two, one of which will be easy to answer. Will there be CEU credits available for this discussion? And the answer, unfortunately, is no, because nobody thought to check that out ahead of time. But that's a good thought for the future. I'm not 100% sure if something open-ended like this would qualify, although we will have a little bit of content. So I guess the short answer is not today, but when we do these in the future, we might be able to secure maybe one credit. I don't think we could get more than that, because it's only an hour, but that's something we'll look into with both the Maine Board of Licensure and SAF. The other question that was sent in, somebody was interested in any information or resources for recreational access and use management for private lands. And that question came from Susan Adams. Susan, I don't know if you're on. Are you on? Don't think so. Okay. So what I was going to ask Susan to maybe talk a little bit more about the context of that question so we could better answer it. And maybe that's something we'll do offline or later on if she tunes in. So just before we go a little bit further, does anybody that's on have a question? Has anything sort of come to mind since you signed up that you would like to ask? And if so, I think let's try raising your hand. Let's see what happens. Okay, hand went up. And so that would be Andrew Johnson. So Andrew, why don't you go ahead and unmute and turn your camera on and ask your question. And then we'll get to the other fellow, Forrest Weston.
Hi, I'm Andrew Johnson. I'm actually the new private lands biologist at Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. So nice to meet you, Julie. I've met Andy and Morton, at least virtually. I was wondering, how is the pandemic, is it affecting timber markets in any way, supply and demand for them? You know, what's happening on the ground and how loggers and foresters are able to manage people's forests right now?
From what I'm hearing, I'm not as immersed in it as I used to be in my previous role, but just kind of keeping an ear to the ground and talking to folks that are dealing with it. There does seem to be some impact. I can't say with 100% certainty if it is a direct result of the pandemic, but it seems to be that markets are pretty plugged up, especially the pulp market. Obviously, the explosion that happened at the J Mill had a huge impact. You can't exactly blame that on the pandemic, but even the sawmills seem to be a lot more plugged up than they typically are. So I would say it has seemed to have been causing some problems. And again, I don't know if there's a direct link there, but the market seems to be not as accepting of wood as it has been in the past.
Anybody else on the call that might have something they could add in there? Anecdotal, perhaps? If so, just unmute yourself and go ahead. Maybe we should have done an antitrust statement first, though, just in case. I guess I would say, just from what little bit that I've been able to pick up, I mean, I think I'll just say that I live in Augusta, and wood has moved through Augusta, and I've seen chips moving too, but not at any great volume. So I'm going to say that things are running, but probably there may still be working off the the stockpiles from last winter, and where things were dry at a certain point in the spring. I'm sure that production kept going pretty well then. The last couple of weeks have become a little wetter, but I think like a lot of things, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty about markets going forward. One would guess that the tissue market was good, but exactly whether that means a lot of wood is going to the mills that produce tissue is another thing, because there's a lot of other links to that whole supply chain. Mike, St. Peter, were you going to jump in with something here?
Andy, I think overall, from my travels, we're looking at, I think it's safe to say that, contractors are at 80% of what their usual capacity would be. I think, some maybe a little more than that, some a little less, but I'd say the average is, 80%.
Okay. Mike, you might want to tell the other folks who you are and what you do.
Sure. Mike St. Peter with the Certified Logging Professional Program. We're based here out of Jackman. We have about 1,100 active certified loggers in Maine right now, and we're doing some online training right now to keep people recertified. I also do quite a bit of work for the state of Maine Department of Transportation. I do all their chainsaw training, and certainly since March 15th, that has come to an abrupt halt. But I think that we're going to look at some ways that maybe getting that information out to folks. I did a 2-hour chainsaw training for Maine woodland owners last Friday. That seemed to be well received. So I think, we've got things in queue, and I believe that we'll have to change with the times and do whatever needs to be done to get this information out to everyone.
All right, thanks. Did you say you did that 2-hour training? It must have been a virtual training, right?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thank you. Forrest Weston, did you have a question, or were you going to raise your hand at some point?
Sorry about that, Andy. I was just, I think my fat thumb, I'm on my phone and I think my fat thumb may have hit the hand. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It tests the process anyway.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think a lot of us are having that fat finger syndrome with all these devices we're trying to use. But I appreciate you being here. And I think you were the one who asked about credits, and hopefully you heard me say that that's something we'll look into for the future. But I didn't think far enough ahead for this event. But glad you're here anyway.
Thanks.
So does anybody else have a question or something they'd like to bring up at this point? That's okay. If not, Morton Mosswild might have a few things he could impart.
Sure. Folks, my name is Morton Mosswild. I'm a forester with the Maine Forest Service, and I'm just going to share my screen with you folks because I just want to underline some of what Julie was saying earlier. One of them is that Julie covers a district in Franklin and Somerset counties primarily, but there are foresters available for the entire state. So, no matter where you are, a forester's available to provide assistance. And there are, I realize that the names are perhaps a little bit too small, and certainly the phone numbers, but we're easy to find. We have a pretty nice website. It's easy to find a district forester and to be able to ask them for any kind of assistance that you need. And we take phone calls and emails. Our contact info is easy to find. And at the same time, we do spend a fair amount of time in the field, and as Julie was describing, meeting with folks. Just point of emphasis is a lot of landowners don't realize that service is free. They don't. They may not call us just because they're concerned that there's going to be some sort of fee, but we are employed by the state to provide this service, and having us come and visit your woodlot, there's no cost to that. Other than April 15th, that's your tax dollars at work. So we're happy to come out and meet with folks and take a look at their woodlot or particular issues that they're having with trees, or again, as Julie was saying, anyone who's harvesting or planning a harvest, foresters and loggers who are looking for input on what the regulations might say about how you might go forward with management of your woods or a particular property you're working on. We also deal a fair bit with municipalities, as Julie was saying. So there's plenty of towns that have street tree programs or town woodlots or other kinds of forested areas that they are concerned about, and so we provide both on the ground assistance, and also we have a community forestry program called Project Canopy that provides assistance, and also once a year there is a grant program associated with that. So sometimes that seems like a well-kept secret, but there are some towns that do take advantage of that program, and certainly we've had some great partnerships with various municipalities and community groups around the state. I thought it might be just of interest and useful to talk about what some of our messages are, because we find pretty frequently that people, in the first place, they don't know that we're available for assistance, and they don't really know how to start thinking about their woods. Perhaps it's a property that they've owned for a long time, but never really spent much time there, or if they have, they really haven't taken an active role in managing that land or making decisions about that land. Sometimes these are new ownerships, people who have just acquired land. Perhaps they've inherited land from family. Perhaps they've just bought a property in Maine for the first time. And sometimes it's because they're going to live there, and sometimes it's because they've just, they've seen a piece of land, they like the idea of owning land, and they've gone ahead and purchased it. We encounter all of those situations, and so we're trying to provide input on what some of their decisions might be. So it doesn't really matter what someone's initial interests are or how they came into ownership of a piece of land. What we find, I think, across the board is that there are, people are starting from all sorts of different starting points, I guess. But regardless of what the interests or goals are, what we find is that there are some hallmarks of what we might think of as well-managed woodland that are themes that come up again and again and again as we're working with landowners. And again, it doesn't really matter whether people's interests are related to the timber on their property or wood products that they might be using themselves, or whether they're more interested in habitat or the wildlife that they might see out there, or just having a sense of of privacy or recreation on the land around their home. It doesn't matter. They're the woodlands that we see that we might think of as well managed have some consistent themes. One of them, as you'll see here, is that people tend to take some time to think about what the goals are and the values that they have for the property, whether that's again across the spectrum from recreation and aesthetics and wildlife habitat to timber management and wood products and growing those for the future. And oftentimes it's important for family members to communicate with each other about what their different interests are. Perhaps if it's a husband and wife or a group of siblings, but the more that families can talk about what it is that's important to them about their woodlands, the better off they are, and the more they might have a sense of direction. Oftentimes when we're walking with landowners, property boundaries come into play. Obviously, if you're going to be making decisions about a piece of land, a piece of woodland, it's important to know where your boundaries are and whether they're marked on the land, whether you have some sort of map that identifies where the property boundaries are, and what sort of the literal sideboards of the property are as far as the decisions that you're making about them. I use the term access system. How do people get out onto the land? And that's a fancy way of saying, are there roads or trails or any way that allows the landowner to get out onto their property and either enjoy it or work there? So an access system for some folks might be land management roads or a logging road that enables them to do some sort of harvesting. For other folks, an access system might just mean that they have some foot trails or snowshoeing trails or ski trails that enable them to get out onto their property and enjoy it, and also monitor what's going on there, so that over time they can see what's happening in their woods. So that's a common feature. People who have spent some time getting out onto their property, whatever way is easiest for them, and developing those trails or roads, that's often very helpful for folks. We certainly encourage people to have a forester write a forest management plan, basically putting down on paper what their goals are, what is in their woods, what the condition of those woods are, and depending on the conditions and depending on their goals, what kinds of activities might they try to implement over time? Again, that might be trail projects. It might be dealing with invasive species. It might be some form of timber harvesting or forest improvement projects, creating different kinds of wildlife habitat. The purpose of a forest management plan is to think about all that, evaluate with the help of a licensed forester, typically, what's in their woods, and then just give themselves a bit of a roadmap so that so that they have some direction as far as how to achieve their goals. And flowing out of that plan is some kind of program of activities and projects. And again, those can range across the spectrum from timber harvesting to trail projects to various types of wildlife habitat enhancement projects. Implemented skillfully essentially means that you're working either with some training that you might have gotten yourself or gotten some input from your forester, or you might be working with a logger or a private forester who's giving you direction. And certainly the skills and resources of people that you're going to be working with are really important. And that's why we have programs like the CLP, Certified Logging Professional Program, that Mike St. Peter was talking about a moment ago. We've mentioned having a relationship and working with a Maine licensed forester. Professional foresters are licensed by the state of Maine. Foresters' role is really evaluating woodlands and helping landowners plan for various activities, and in many cases doing some field work and overseeing those projects. Most foresters are not loggers. Some are, but many are not. So part of the job of a forester is to have a relationship with the landowner for whom they're working and helping them to communicate with a logger so that there's a common understanding of what the goals of any particular project are. And it's important for landowners to think about having an ongoing relationship with with their forester. Certainly, Maine Forest Service, our district foresters, we're here, we're available to work with you. Many times we're going to be referring you to a private forester to do a sort of ongoing work to write a management plan, to help you oversee a management project, a harvest, or something of that kind. And then finally, the word estate plan, or the words estate plan, can mean a whole range of different things. It basically reflects the fact that trees and forests take decades to grow. Many times the trees will outlive us. And if you have invested time and energy on your property to manage it well, we use the word stewardship a lot of the time. So if you have stewarded your property, we encourage you to think about and communicate with your family members or others that the future of that land is going to be assured. And there are resources out there for landowners to do estate planning that will help perpetuate the good work that they've done and the stewardship they've had of their land well into the future. So these, as you can see, are it's food for thought. And certainly when we meet with a brand new landowner, this is something that they haven't necessarily thought about, but these are some directions, some things for them to think about. And for others, oftentimes we find that people have spent some time attending to these different aspects of managing and really just making decisions about your woodland. So I think I'll stop there and just underline that these are all themes and topics that any of our district foresters work with and talk about with landowners as they're asking questions about their woodland. So I'll turn it back to you, Andy, and I'll stop sharing my screen and see if there are questions.
Okay, thank you, Mort. I seem to be echoing. I don't know. Oh, there you go. That stopped. Good. Again, thanks, Mort. I think another way, well, are there any questions? Or anyone would like to unmute, ask a question, or perhaps has a comment about these hallmarks, these aspects of woodland stewardship, of forest management? Not seeing that. I think what I would say to add on to what Mort talked about is that when I think of stewardship, I think of it as a series of steps. This is sort of a theme. There's a pathway or a progression or a story, even you could think of it, of your woods and what happens next. And one way to look at meeting with a district forester or calling the Maine Forest Service in general is to figure out what that next step is, or several steps. Every one of those hallmarks that Mort mentioned does involve a series of steps. You know, finding your property lines, marking them. You know, sometimes that requires hiring somebody to do that, which means finding a forester. When it comes to finding foresters or getting forest management plans done, these are areas that we are definitely geared up to help landowners with. We have a referral list of licensed foresters on our website. We have a program that assists with a certain type of forest management plan that we call a Woodland Resource Action Plan, and we have a little bit of money to help defray costs there. So these are just things to keep in mind when the time comes, when it makes sense. I do see a question coming up in the chat. It says, how do the district foresters go about recommending private foresters for a landowner? What criteria do they use? So I think that's a good question to ask a district forester, Julie. Can you help answer that?
I can do my best. So kind of our protocol is we typically will recommend multiple names if it comes down to that, but I think we all have each of us has a running list of licensed foresters that do work in our district. I know mine is set up, it's a relatively lengthy document actually, but it's intended kind of as a guide from start to finish. So it explains to landowners what different types of foresters there are, consultants versus like procurement foresters, arborists, various things like that. And then in the final part, I have a list broken down kind of by area because I have multiple counties in my district of just who the different folks are that do work in that realm. I do have people who are stewardship foresters who can do WoodsWise plans. They're noted separately, or they have a little asterisk next to their name. I also try to keep on top of who is qualified to write the EQIP or NRCS plans if that's something that someone's particularly looking for. But as far as making the actual recommendation, usually what ends up happening is it's kind of a mix of location and what that person's looking for. So if I know that somebody just wants a tree growth plan, I typically won't send them towards somebody who is really only interested in procuring wood or overseeing timber harvest, that type of thing, but always at least 3 names and with a strong recommendation to call all 3 of them. Just because I think foresters, like anybody, sometimes you click with somebody and sometimes you don't. So definitely a lot of pressure onto landowners to do their research, make connections with multiple folks, see who they get the best feeling from and move forward from that. Does that answer your question?
Well, we got to thank you in the chat. So I think that was real useful. Mort, did you want to add something?
No, I think that's a pretty complete answer. We do we do try to help landowners understand that it's their responsibility to reach out. And I often say, having a conversation with multiple foresters really is is educational. You'll find out what different services people provide, and what someone's sort of emphasis, if they have one in their work, might be. So it's really valuable for landowners to understand that they can learn something by talking with multiple foresters, and as Julie said, identify who they feel most comfortable with. And also, part of that is, as with any professional, you ask for references, you ask for samples of work or places where you can go to look at their work. And so for a consultant, I'd suggest, that if you're speaking with a prospective client, you might approach it from that way, be ready to offer a list of references, be able to suggest, where, if anywhere, you might be able to show off the work that you've done in the past. So that's essentially the process. It's trying to get people connected with someone so they can have that ongoing working relationship.
Okay. The one thing I might add to this, just from where I sit here at the Harlow building, is that we do have that stewardship forester list online. That's a statewide list, about 150 names, give or take. Folks join the list and sometimes they drop off, but that's sort of a basic blueprint. And we also have a function online, a map showing the business location of all of those folks, all the stewardship foresters, so that you can do a little geographic sorting. But I also always recommend that folks get in touch with their local district forester, so that, as Julie said, she's got more local knowledge. And not every consultant forester is on that stewardship forester list, and that doesn't mean that they wouldn't do a great job. So just to underline what everybody says, it's a matter of a little bit of due diligence and really shopping for the right fit. Ideally, that relationship will last for a while. It's not just get your management plan and be done with it, but that consulting forester will become, a resource through the years, through harvest, through plan update, through estate planning, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So I'm wondering if there are any other questions. Anybody want to raise their hand, unmute, and ask a question or make a comment? So seeing none, I might mention the types of questions that I get as landowner outreach forester.
Andy, can I just jump in? I'm just noticing there's something in the chat.
Absolutely.
And I think it's Jordan asking, today with timber prices the way they are, does it make sense from an economic perspective to invest in woodlots in Maine? If someone wants to buy woodland and manage for timber harvesting in a responsible way, would you recommend for them to do so? I think, that's a great question. We do actually talk with a lot of new landowners who have just decided to purchase land. And we also get quite a few questions, or at least I have in the past. I'm sure it's true of other foresters as well. We get a lot of questions that relate to, I'm looking at a piece of land, or I'm considering buying land. Most often, people have multiple interests when they're purchasing land. I don't think it's common among sort of the typical woodland owner. I don't think it's common for them to be purchasing that land primarily or especially exclusively as a timber investment. The folks that we deal with by and large, or the folks that I've dealt with by and large, are people who are interested in owning a piece of land. They might be thinking about a residence down the road. They might be looking for a place to hunt, that sort of thing. So timber is not the sole objective. I think there's a lot that goes into sort of an economic analysis of whether or not timberland is a good investment. I think it's going to vary a lot by where you are in the state and what sort of the asking price is for different parcels of land, because obviously land often gets sold based on its development value, and that may not fit with an outlook that is primarily based on timber income, and oftentimes will be ranging over at least a couple of decades. So I'm sure that doesn't answer your question entirely, but that's just sort of a way that we think about it. Certainly. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I would add to that, in just kind of a broader scale, longer term aspect. We in New England, and especially in Maine, are have a unique advantage in that we have quite a bit of market share. We have the mills available to buy the product, and we're also situated relatively close by to a heavy demand area. We've got that New York, Boston, New Jersey area that does have a lot of demand for buildings and for just consumption in general. And like I said, that uniquely coupled with the fact that we do have the mills and we also have the product, I think it sets Maine up at an advantage as compared to maybe some of the other states. I think, in my own opinion, we're also a relatively timber harvesting friendly state compared to maybe some other areas. I really haven't gotten out of Maine much, but I do think just our market share is a powerful aspect when it comes to making investments into land with timber as a main priority.
Yeah, I'll second that. I do converse with my counterparts in other states, particularly in the Northeast and Midwest. And as I talk with them, I realize how really lucky we are in Maine. The markets we have, even though they may seem like they're not as good as they used to be, but at least we have them. The other thing about markets and prices is they run the roller coaster anyway. Certainly right at the moment, it's hard to see the future, or it's harder than usual to think we're seeing the future, but anyone who's been around a little bit knows that sooner or later there will be markets coming back, prices will come back up. And as Mort mentioned, it's not necessarily always a matter of a timber investment, whether you're going to harvest timber. There can be other results of a timber harvest. And as long as there's some market for the wood, you can go forward. So it really comes down to one of my universal answer to most questions is it depends. But in general, I think that for folks that really want to have a piece of woods, Maine is a great place to do it. So anybody else with a question? Well, one thing I thought I would mention, since we had Andrew Johnson with us, and I think he's still with us. Let's just see if he is. Yes, he is a lot of landowners will, in my conversations with them, they will say something along the lines of, well, I don't want to cut any trees because I want to make sure that there's plenty of places for the critters to go, the wildlife. And that's a whole set of discussions. I wondered, Andrew, if you had anything you might want to mention about that.
Yeah, if someone's interested in wildlife, I think a very important thing to understand is management can definitely benefit wildlife. Leaving the forest alone is not really a natural thing. Disturbance is a natural thing. And right now, a lot of our forests are growing back from you know, that aren't growing from natural conditions. They're growing back from agriculture, 50, 100, 150 years ago. And so they're not, even a forest that hasn't been touched since then is not in a natural state. It still has, 100, 200, 300 years to go before it'll be more in a natural state where you've got a lot of dead down wood and standing dead and large trees and gaps. So management can actually be used to put your forest into more of a natural state and kind of hurry it towards that that state where there's diversity, where you've got gaps, where you've got some large trees growing, where you've got different age classes. And that's what, most wildlife are adapted to, is to a diversity of conditions. If you want diverse wildlife, you need a diversity of conditions. And most unmanaged forests are just kind of in this stagnant, homogeneous situation. So yeah, managing your forest, cutting some trees can definitely improve conditions for wildlife and boost your diversity. There's been some studies looking at wildlife diversity in forests by age, and you have the highest diversity in your youngest growth. That's, early successional forest, something that was just, cut or burned or a hurricane blew things down in the last 20 years. Highest diversity there. And then in your old growth, that's, 300 years old. That period in between, when everything's the same age and has shaded out the understory, is actually when there's the least wildlife, because there's not a lot of good hiding places down on the ground. There's not a lot of snags, standing dead trees with cavities. But that's where most of our forests are, is in that in-between stage. Doing management can improve that condition, get some dead wood on the ground, keep some cavity trees, make some gaps, allow some of those trees to grow bigger, allow there to be some young growth and some old growth in the mix. Management can really benefit wildlife. Doing nothing, you're going to have to wait decades or centuries to have, big benefits from doing nothing. That doesn't mean doing nothing is all wrong. I think having a balance is important. And so it's like sometimes when working with land trusts where they have a lot of land to work with and are looking at the long term, there might be some section that they set as their reserve section where they're just not going to bother. They're going to let it follow a very natural course over, for centuries, hopefully. And then other areas where they are actively managing to, direct things in a specific direction. So yeah, management is very beneficial to wildlife. Go for it.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think that perhaps in the future, we might want to do one of these lunch hours totally focused on different habitat management techniques, if that's where the questions come in from. I know that a lot of woodland owners, at least based on surveys, a lot of woodland owners put wildlife habitat high up on their list of reasons for owning land or their goals and objectives for the land that they have. So we are approaching the top of the hour, and just once more, I'd like to open it up to anybody that wants to unmute and ask a question or make a comment, maybe about something that we've already spoken about, or suggest other topics that we could focus on for the future. Be happy to hear from you. I did post the link to that survey, which is another place, and believe me, it is a short survey. It's not one of those, it'll only take 5 minutes, but it's really an hour and 5 minutes. This one should be very quick, and again, it's going to be very helpful to us to continue doing this in the future and to do it better. So I really appreciate anybody that can take that time to do that. Does anybody, any of our other presenters want to come back in with a few closing words? Julie or Morton?
I'll thank everybody who logged in today. This was a big fat trial for us. So we're still testing the water. So we appreciate anybody who logs in because we're definitely looking for feedback. And the idea behind this is to try to stay relevant and helpful to people who have questions. And it's a little bit rough the first go around every time, but we're hoping to make this something that we can utilize as a tool to better support our mission and helping people out with their trees and forests. So thanks for logging in.
All right.
Same for me. Thanks to everyone for chiming in. I appreciate it, and we'll certainly be looking for feedback and picking individual topics to pursue and explore in more depth. So thank you.
Oh, we did just get a question in. Jordan asked, what is Maine Forest Service doing with the Maine Climate Change Council? So that's a really short, easy to answer question. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, Jordan. I know that we've been participating, but I think that is something that certainly could be a topic for another meeting or another event. So we're going to jot that one down. And at this point, I just know that, we have representation there. And speaking personally, I would love it to be able to say to folks, and if you do this, you will get this carbon benefit. But I don't think we're quite there yet. But we certainly all know that, trees store carbon and they actively draw it out of the atmosphere. So forests are definitely part of the answer to our climate situation. And another question about EAB. And as far as I know, EAB is still only identified in the far north and the far southern parts of the state. There are quarantines around those. Jan Santerre, you might be able to update a little bit on current situation with an EAB, by the way, is emerald ash borer, an extremely destructive forest pest, invasive, that finally was found in Maine just in the last couple of years. Jan, have you got anything? Because I think perhaps you occasionally talk to the others.
Yeah, Andy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. I am on a different device than normal. The EEB quarantines are still just those northern tier towns around Madawaska, Frenchville, I think Fort Kent, and then on the southern end, the quarantine is, I believe, pretty much all of York and Cumberland County. Might even include a couple of Oxford County towns. So far as I know, during this field season, we haven't found any new detections of the insect or outside of the existing areas. And if you've got specific questions about management or anything like that, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or to Allison Canody or Colleen Tierling. We are doing a quarterly phone call with folks who are managers for EAB and would welcome additional folks to join that. So.
Okay, thanks. And Jan, maybe you should mention what you do, who you are and what you do.
Yeah, for those of you on in the meeting that don't know me, I'm Jan Santerre. I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator, otherwise known as Project Canopy, and I heard Morton refer to the program earlier. So what we do is work with cities and towns throughout the state in helping them to plant their urban and community forest, as well as to manage town-owned forest resources. The program is also available to nonprofit entities, organizations like land trusts, educational institutions, schools, hospitals, and any other public forest resources.
Okay, thanks, Jan.
Good enough? You're welcome. Sorry, I'm
Yes,
shaking.
and I guess I should, wait, you're still talking, but we're not hearing you.
Oh, I said, sorry, I'm a little bit shaky. I'm on an iPad.
Yeah, okay. Jan mentioned Project Canopy, and I should mention that our other signature program is called Be WoodsWise, or the WoodsWise Incentives Program, and that refers to generally all our efforts in outreach to woodland owners. So between WoodsWise and Project Canopy, we pretty much are trying to be there for everybody who has trees and tree questions. Greg Lord posted in the chat a link to the Emerald Ash Borer information page on our website, where you'll see the latest on things of that nature. Also, Julie put up the phone number for the Insect and Disease Lab. This is another branch of Maine Forest Service that we call Forest Health and Monitoring. We have entomologists on staff. Basically, we call them the Bug Lab, and any one of us can connect you to folks there with specific, if you have specific questions about emerald ash borer or any insect really that is bothering or around your trees, even the good ones, and there are some good ones. So it's anything that you run into, if you can take a picture and send it in, usually they can identify it from the picture. So it's 12:59. Appreciate the comments we did get, the thank yous, and hopefully you all found this worthwhile. And we will see if we can do it again probably next month. We're considering this as a monthly feature, and we'll send the word out once again. So with that, last chance for a question or a comment. And I think we're good. So have a great rest of the day, everybody. And we'll see you next time.